Now, the amaZulu royal household has distanced itself from the actions of amaButho, who swarmed former President Jacob Zuma's Nkandla homestead on Saturday in a bid to demonstrate their support for him. amaZulu Prime Minister Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi said the regiments and their leader, Sihoko Ntlego, acted in defiance. The regiments are among hundreds of people who have gathered outside the former president's home as he tries to stay out of prison after being found guilty of being in contempt of the Constitutional Court. Joining us now this afternoon is Professor Musa Xulu, a Zulu musicology expert. Professor Xulu, good to have you with us this afternoon. First and foremost, perhaps let's start with the definition of who amaButho are and how they are composed.
Now, thank you very much and good afternoon. amaButho is a part of a system of graduating from youth to males. One becomes an Ibutho upon reaching puberty. Before King Shaka, each and every clan had their own amaButho. It's equal to what happens to, for example, our Xhosa people and also our Sotho people who have circumcision to mark a graduation from one stage in life to another. When the Zulu kingdom became centralized in the 1800s, it became the responsibility of the king, not the entire royal house, the king, to graduate the young men, usually around the age of 18, 19, 20, to become amaButho. He would slaughter cat same color because each Ibutho had to. Ibutho is a legion, possibly 5,000, 10,000 youngsters in one group. They would then have to wear same colors in terms of their skin buttocks, called ibeshu, as well as same colors for their shields. So no two amaButho would have two colors, same colors. That was the responsibility of the king. He also funded it, well, he sponsored it through the slaughter of his own cattle and created this tradition. And then, of course, strengthened it. It was the case, the case during the times of Shaka. I think he had about 12 sets of amaButho around himself in his 12 years. And then, of course, it was also the same centralization was still there during the times of King Tingane. But when King Pande took over in the 1840s, that culture became lesser and lesser. The Zulu nation became again a loose federation of tribes who had very strong regional leaders who sometimes did not need any sanctioning from the king, and sometimes would argue much against the wishes of the king. There are instances, for example, in 1856, on the 2nd of December, the two sons of King Pande, Cetshwayo and Mboyazi, fought at a battle called Indondakusuma. There was no sanctioning of any of those amaButho who fought there by the king. And then, of course, that was when King Cetshwayo became king, and there was a problem with the ultimatum from the English on the 11th of December 1878, which demanded cattle and everything from the Zulu people. It was amaButho who refused that the cattle should be given to the British colony. And much against the wishes of the king, they had their way. And upon assembly in that year, for the first fruit ceremony, they took a decision to go and fight in Isandlwana, much against the wishes of the king and much against, in fact, the prime minister at the time, Buthelezi. He left. He was not interested in the war. He thought that this could have been handled differently. So what I'm saying here is that the relationship between the king, not the entire Zulu royal family, the king, and amaButho is that of, you know, when you need me, I need you. When I don't need you, I don't need you. But there's a lot of independence. Now, fast forward to the times of political violence there in Gauteng, on the Rand, in the 1990s especially. There were lots of marches by amaButho in and out, here and there, going there and fighting with whomever was on their way. That was not sanctioned by any king or the Zulu royal family. The structure today of amaButho is that of a lot of independence. People like Mkilija, which by the way is doing very well on renewing this culture, and we saw during the passing of our late Bayete in March, how he, using his own resources, was able to mobilize amaButho from around the country in honor of the king. That is very good to be done by people. And most of these now, they buy their own attire. They like the culture. They're not relying on the Zulu royal household for anything. They're just saying we are here, but we also have our own lives. And that has helped a lot also to remove them. You know, they had an identity of a political party in the 1990s, especially, and the early 2000s. That identity of a political party is now gone, and they are a purely cultural group that is interested in reviving Zulu culture. They are on the renewal side of Zulu culture. And,
so is it then, Professor, incorrect or inaccurate to call amaButho the king's regiments?
No, they are not necessarily today. They are not necessarily today because, look, during the times of King Shaka, each Ibutho legion would have a name. So you'll have Uve, you'll have this, and you'll have this. They were all named. They were given a name to differentiate. There's nothing like that today. Everyone who culturally feels like they like this culture, we heard President Jacob Zuma saying he is also an Ibutho. But he's not saying which legion, which one does he belong to. And therefore, you'll find that all these people like Gelija and so on do not have that kind of order that was there in the 1800s.
Professor, do amaButho have any sort of military training? You mentioned earlier on that it's a title that you graduate into upon, quote-unquote, becoming a man in Zulu culture. But is there anything further that happens after initiation, any sort of military training perhaps that takes place in order for you to fully qualify as Ibutho?
No, there's no military training formally, but you must also remember that the lines are blurred between Zulu dances, Zulu entertainment, and Zulu militarism. You'll find that most of those young men have not been trained militarily anywhere, but they look at themselves, they perceive themselves as warriors, as fighters. It's a self-perception. It's more of looking back, maybe to say today this is the situation, it's a constitutional democracy, there is now absolute monarchy, but we would like to keep this culture, this cultural heritage alive. It's a cultural heritage, and they should be actually applauded for keeping this cultural heritage alive. I'm not talking about political affiliation and what happens to who and where. It's a very good way of keeping our past re-engineered so that our identity is not lost.
So from what I'm hearing you say, Professor Xulu, the role of the amaButho is more cosmetic, it's more ceremonial, it's about the preservation of Zulu culture, and not a strategic role in any way, sort, or form.
No, today it's exactly as you say, my sister. It's exactly as you say. I mean, just imagine if we follow, I don't know, I've read some newspapers that certain people in the Zulu royal household expected themselves to have been responsible for deploying them. Just imagine the king, the present king, deploying amaButho to Nkandla, and then there is a clash with the police or the military of the country. What would that be? The voluntary aspect, such as practiced by Mkilija, is what is needed so that on their own they take responsibility to put whatever on display, what they wear, and the songs that they sing, and the dances, they put that on display. But there's no military training that they go through.
So let me ask you then, because there's clearly a conflict of perception here. You're saying that amaButho has now morphed itself into a cultural formation. It's clear by what we heard today earlier on from Prime Minister of the Zulu nation and the reports that are coming out from the King, that there are going to be meetings that are going to be held to discuss why the amaButho were there, who deployed them, to such an extent where the royal family has distanced themselves from the presence of amaButho. Why is there a misalignment of understanding of who amaButho are and who has the authority to deploy them?
Maybe let me go back again to what happened in 1879 with the Anglo-Zulu War. The king and his minister, prime minister, were against the war. amaButho on their own went ahead and went to fort and defeated the English. On their own, it was a resounding victory. On their own, self-deployed, because they were saying that the Zulu nation is not going to be disrespected in this way. That is the past. That was almost 150 years ago. We are now in 2021. The deployment of amaButho can only be cultural. And how does it happen? It cannot be military, because we are living now in a democracy, we are part of South Africa. So even that thought itself is a little bit misaligned. I think, and maybe I should say this, I did say again that there was a time when amaButho had a party political identity. What they are doing now by becoming cultural, they are freeing themselves from a political party identity, and they are freeing themselves to be free to express themselves according to this cultural heritage which they like and they've aligned themselves with.
Professor Xulu, we'll leave it at that for this afternoon, but thank you for that insight and perspective. It's so important to be able to know the origins of amaButho as well as the current role that they play now, to be able to put all of that and the differing perspectives into context. We thank you very much for your insight this afternoon.